The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to those expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the OSIP Foundation Incorporated or any other group or individual. This podcast may contain dialogue or subject material that could be considered for mature audiences only. All aspects of How You Play the Game and the OSIP Foundation Incorporated are protected by copyright and other state and federal intellectual property laws. Unauthorized use without the express written consent of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated is strictly prohibited. If you're interested in sponsoring How You Play the Game, please email us at podcast@osipfoundation.org. Your sponsorship may be tax deductible. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of How You Play the Game, the official podcast of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated. Yours truly, Jack Furlong, with you as we talk about what's going on as far as the world of sportsmanship is concerned. This is the first episode of the month of August. The year is 2026. Glad you can be with us. As always, check us out online at osipfoundation.org. You can contact the show using the email address podcast@osipfoundation.org, and on the socials, we're at facebook.com/osipfoundation, X and Instagram at osipfoundation, hashtag How You Play the Game. This episode is just a little late this month. I apologize for that. My better half and I just bought a house, and the amount of time that it has taken out of our daily lives is, I think the technical term is redonkulous, if I may. So we are, we're catching up, but all is well and good. So we keep on keeping on, and it's actually kind of an interesting thing that we by doing this, we got lucky in that the delay of this episode by even just a day or two allowed for a few more things to kind of occur in the wake of what I wanted to discuss, and I think might actually make the episode a little bit better. So everything always works out, doesn't it? So here's what I want to discuss today. It's kind of an interesting way to get from point A to point B, but it's basically trying to understand some of the context of a couple of things. When we talk about sportsmanship in terms of how we treat other people, how we empathize, and are able to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, if you pull the lens back a little bit, it kind of just comes down to making sure that you gather your facts, that you try and see all different sides, and it's not necessarily about the persuasion of I must be right and you must be wrong. It's more about just trying to make sure that there's a proper digestion of the information available in a vulnerable way before opinions start getting formulated, and perhaps more importantly, fingers start getting pointed. Now, let me kind of talk to you about what I mean by this. I'm going to give you an example of something, and then use that example to kind of transition to the other point that I was kind of batting around in my head a little bit in order to make this episode. So a couple months ago, when we were at the 4th annual OSIP celebration, I was hanging out with Chris Conroy, our guest of honor, my good friend. And so it was a Sunday night, and he mentioned to me that he had to catch a 5:45 a.m. flight out of Philly to Minneapolis in, just a couple of hours. And I was like, what, really? Geez, oh man, get another drink then. Why don't you? And I asked him why, and he says, well, in the collective bargaining agreement that governs Major League umpires right now, it says that if you fly on game day, if you're going from one destination to another, you are required to take the first available flight out of the city. So that means that, Chris is at home outside of Philly, and he's got to get to Minneapolis to start a set with the Twins the next night. So the first flight out of Philly to Minneapolis is at 5:45 in the morning. So he's got to get up and catch that flight. He is required to do that. And he told me the story of he's able to catch that flight, and then he goes and he's got a little clout at the hotel, so he can check in early, go grab a nap, and then feel reasonably refreshed to go do the game. And he said, ironically, he only had to work third base, so it wasn't that stressful of an evening anyway. And then you catch up on sleep, and the rest is history. I said, oh, okay, well, that works. But fast forward to a recent weekend when the New York Yankees are in Philadelphia to play the Phillies. And Chris's crew had that game. So it's a weekend that Chris gets to spend at home. And I actually went to go see the Saturday night game when Chris was behind the plate. It was my first time getting to see him work live. It was really exciting. And you're there watching that while you're also watching the Yankees, and then on the other dugout, your boyhood idol Don Mattingly is managing the Phillies, and then the Yankees won, and it was so all's well, and it's a good night, even though I spent way too much money on food. So you're watching the series, and the third game of that series is the Sunday night game on NBC. So that's like a 7:20 first pitch. All right. The crew, Chris's crew, then has to go to Pittsburgh to start the next series Monday night while the Pirates are hosting the Arizona Diamondbacks. So that means that you got a 7:20 first pitch on Sunday. Game gets over a little before 10, probably in that area. Well, the crew is probably taking the first flight out of Philly to Pittsburgh Monday morning. All right. So what does that mean? You're going to be tired. Anyone who's ever done that, probably a little tired, right? Okay. Monday night, Ben May is working third base. He had the plate Sunday night for that game, and he's working third base Monday night in Pittsburgh. So there's a call in the game that Ben makes on a check swing, and he got the call right. Spoiler alert. Okay. Don Kelly, the manager for the Pirates, argues and gets ejected by Ben May. And when I see this, and as I'm digesting it, it dawns on me, wait a second. They got in real early. It was a situation where he could have been tired, and maybe the patience that he might have otherwise had was gone because of the fatigue. Or maybe he had a cup of coffee and a Red Bull, and he was able to get through the game and do it well. But, we forget that these are human beings. So when these human beings are working these games, and when the human beings are tired and whatnot, this is what happens. So the point I'm trying to make is that right, wrong, or indifferent, there are extraneous factors and reasons that go into certain things that could fall under the heading of sportsmanship. Okay? The point I'm trying to make is, if you want to look at that confrontation and ejection, perhaps there was something where when you realized that they had to take a real early flight that morning before they went and worked the game, this can happen. Okay? You're gonna get an umpire who's tired and probably caffeined and sugared up to make sure that he can just get through the game, and he's not having it from someone who's arguing a check swing. I'm not saying that's what happened. What I'm saying is that if you're a human and you can comprehend this, you'll be like, oh, okay, this is not normally known by the public, but this is information that helps us understand why this happened. Okay? So with that being said, and let me preface this by saying, again, OSIP does not take political stances. Okay, I continue to champion the fact that my own personal political opinions are mine. They do not reflect OSIP or anyone else. I vehemently want people to understand that when I talk about them, I'm speaking just for myself. I'm trying my best not to persuade someone. I'm just trying to tell you what I think and feel. You are free to disagree so long as you are respectful and you are, willing to have the conversation, because I want to try and respect and hear what other people have to say. Okay? So I'm watching and reading and researching about the testimony that Anthony Fauci was giving in Congress when they were basically asking him questions about COVID and everything. Now, if you were not familiar with what happened, Fauci was summoned to testify, and I believe the final count was about 111 times that he pleaded the fifth. Okay, and the issue with that is that we got nothing out of that. It was a real nothing burger, if you will, when it comes to trying to gain any sort of information to figure out what exactly happened and who's responsible, gaining anything from this. All right. Now, if you are a legal scholar, you might, be able to kind of break this down a little bit, perhaps better than me. And I say that with some reservation because knowing the people that I know in the legal community, the law has become very slanted as well, in all different directions, especially if you are an attorney. Your goal is to argue a particular interpretation of the law as opposed to, the honest truth, the objective truth that might be in a vacuum. So from the research that I have done, the stance that I seem to keep finding is that Fauci is not allowed to plead the fifth because he has already been pardoned for all potential crimes or anything related to that. Therefore, it becomes null and void for that because, the Fifth Amendment is meant to protect you from incriminating yourself. Well, if the charges are off the table, that is where the argument gets made that you can't do that anymore. So there's a lot of discussion right now about whether he committed perjury by not, or is in contempt because he was not willing to answer and, stuff like that. So as this stuff is unfolding and as we're reading it and as more opinion pieces are being published and so on and so forth, you see a lot of responses in the media and on social media and whatnot that are pretty polarizing. There's a lot of vitriol. There's a lot of just stuff coming up from COVID that kind of directs our opinions and our feelings very strongly. So as I'm reading, people's opinions, as I'm reading some of the reaction pieces online and whatnot, I start to realize that what's happening here, right, wrong, or indifferent, is that emotion and unresolved trauma is really guiding what people are expressing and feeling across the board in this. I have friends on social media who are staunch defenders of anything and everything that Anthony Fauci has ever done with regard to COVID. And I have friends on social media who think he is the Antichrist. So all of those things considered, it's a pretty big spectrum there, right? And I'm trying to figure out, what's real? What's real here? And the best thing that I can relay here, especially in terms of sportsmanship, is that I hope people understand that the trauma that was done by the pandemic across the board, without even pointing fingers, was immense. I still feel it myself here in 2026. I'm still I still think about it, and I don't wish any of that on my worst enemy. It's a prison. It's, the psychology of a prison sentence was felt by many of us. So, what I think and feel about what really happened in that hearing and in that testimony is kind of ancillary compared to the fact that, the truth here is, the people's reactions are based in the psychology of their experience. So when I read somebody post online that this man was a saint and couldn't have done anything, better or blah, 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 I'm like, Okay, and then I read the other side, and they say this man is a war criminal, and he's responsible for so many deaths and destruction and what. I'm like, okay, so whatever the truth is, and believe me, we live in a time when truth is no longer objective. Truth has become very subjective. Whatever the truth is, we owe it to ourselves to vulnerably and openly investigate all different sides before we create an opinion. And in doing so, part of the sportsmanship of this is just trying to understand what different people have experienced. Again, you don't have to agree with it. Okay, that's. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to persuade people one way or the other, but we have to understand that different factors can influence events. Okay, if a lack of sleep can influence an umpire's decision to eject someone, then the trauma that someone has felt from a particular event might influence their reaction to congressional testimony. Okay, that's the point here. So again, I'm not trying to tell people who are listening to this that they must feel a particular way about this testimony. What I'm trying to say is that this stuff happens, man. And if you really want to be a better fan, a better citizen, a better person, try having a little bit of empathy. Okay? And see where that takes you. And that does not mean you have to agree with people. I know what my opinions are, okay? And I have tried very much to make sure that those opinions are molded appropriately because I don't want to hold hate. I don't want to hold anger, okay? But I also know what I feel and what my response is when I read this stuff, see this stuff, hear this stuff, experience this stuff. And I'm trying to put that into context so that I don't feel like I'm going so far off the deep end like people on either side might be. If you go back to that game between the Pirates and the Diamondbacks, and you listen to some of the broadcasters, broadcasters for Pittsburgh, are saying this was BS, and broadcasters for Arizona are saying, how can you argue that? That was a great call. Okay, and none of the broadcasters are going to say, maybe he got in late and, we should probably be nice to him. It just doesn't happen. And the same thing is happening with this. Nobody, the middle ground opinion piece doesn't get any play as opposed to the polarizing pieces. And if that middle ground piece was going to get some play, watch the comments come in of how people are going to try and sway that one way or the other. At no point does a middle ground piece come in and then someone says, yep, that's it. Doesn't happen that often, folks. Okay? So in conclusion, what I want people to remember is that whether you're playing sports, whether you're consuming sports, whether you're consuming politics, anything that has any sort of conflict or competition or anything where you can create an opinion on certain things, especially if it's going to elicit a psychological response from you, take a step back, try and gather the information. Try and put yourself in a safe environment when you're doing that. Because if you don't, you're more likely to be tilted one way or the other. And then begin to formulate some opinions and leave yourself some flexibility. Because when you do that, you're going to find yourself happier. You're going to find yourself healthier. You're going to find yourself in less conflict with other people. You're going to find yourself leading by example and setting the example for others to do the same thing and say, geez, maybe I can let my guard down. Because that's what happens when this stuff occurs, is that the defense mechanisms go up and people are not willing to be vulnerable. They're not willing to say, geez, maybe what I thought maybe what I felt, maybe what I said, maybe what I experienced could have been somehow wrong or incorrect, and maybe I needed to gather more information. People don't like to do that. All right, that's my point here. So, following these steps, doing this, does nothing but help you. Okay? And I encourage you to try and make that a priority in your life. I really think it will elevate you. I know it's worked for me. Okay? So I hope it works for you as well. That's it for today. Again, thank you for being with us. If you'd like to contact the show, use the address podcast@osafoundation.org. The website is osafoundation.org. Facebook.com/osafoundation. X and Instagram @osafoundation. #HowYouPlayTheGame. We'll talk to everybody in just a few short weeks. And until then, treat each other with respect. How You Play the Game is a production of the OSIP Foundation, Incorporated. The producer-engineer of this episode is Sean Ryan. Music by Soundspring Studio. The executive producer of How You Play the Game is Jack Furlong. For more information, visit osipfoundation.org.